Good evening and welcome to episode 24 of the Layover. Tonight, Scott is full of hot air. Mark discusses illegal inversions, and I'm going to talk about a recent makeover. Welcome to the Layover Live.
One life for the revolution. Rise up and unite. Woo! Rise up.
Hey everyone, how are you? I love it every week that we start that we're laughing our heads off and everybody's thinking, what have they been talking about just before they went on air? And we're not going to tell you.
We need to do a B-roll. We need to do a B-roll of what's gone on before the show. Yes, and hello to everybody who's watching in the future. If you're watching on the on YouTube, catch up, which is awesome.
Well, I have to say, boys, you did very well last week.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I mean, my expectation was relatively low. So
the Indian Embassy's been along to ask if Scott for a few tips on diplomacy.
Yeah, well, I think when I said the end is here or the end is nigh or something for Nivedita, it was very poor, and I had to apologise off air later. She made it sound like it was all over for her, and it really isn't. She was a brilliant guest, though, an absolutely brilliant guest.
Absolutely brilliant.
I just had a very small panic there because I hadn't got the screen set up to play the intro video, so we very nearly started with the outro video.
I noticed there was a slight pause. I didn't want to say anything. I see we've all upped our layover merch game. However, we are going to very soon be completely blown out of the ballpark by Laura and her merch because she's all over it. But these are coming soon. Become part of the layover crew if you want.
Okay.
And we're back in the room, literally in the proper room.
It looks lovely, very white. So, are you going to put some pictures up?
It is very, very white.
Well, the pictures are going to be on the wall, but in front of me, so you won't be able to see it.
I've got some bits of previously, sort of retired airplanes to stick up, which Lindsay's really happy about.
Well, it's still a discussion point. I think it's probably the best.
I'm really loving the helmet, though. Is that a helmet on the bookcase there? It looks amazing.
That is my Gentex Bone Dome, yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know if I've mentioned, but yeah. I used to fly airplanes that needed things like that.
Did you? You never mentioned it.
Yeah. Anyway, look.
This week, Scott? You're full of hot air. What's been happening?
Oh, I'm always full of hot air, The Airlander 10 tweeted this week, giving some insight into some of this amazing new route, showing off their hybrid air vehicle. Manchester to Liverpool and Seattle to Vancouver. 100 seats it's going to have. It's going to be pretty cool, actually. I think we've got some pictures we can bring up of it in a minute.
Yeah.
Well, I keep going. The one thing I will say is, this actually, the whole project, as I'm sure you know, came from a US Navy project. They were designing a hybrid air vehicle or a lighter than air vehicle that could go over minefields and detect the mines. And then Bruce Dickinson, along with a number of others, bought the project for literally a steal. It was a $200 million project, a dollar project that they got for about $5 million. And they've turned it into something that's going to look like this with 100 seats. Yeah, I have to say, it does look pretty cool. However, it sounds good.
That reminds me of that bit in Indiana Jones where he flings him out the window.
Yeah, me too. But it hasn't all been plain sailing, has it, for Airlander?
No.
I'm not a airship expert, but landing your airship like that's probably not going to end well. It was very fortunate not to kill anyone on this occasion, but they have made changes to it, which hopefully will prevent it doing this in the in the future. It's really interesting, though. It's got the same wind limits as a 737, which about 100 seats. Maybe this is the 737 replacement that Boeing are looking for. This could be the future, hybrid air travel. I don't know. I'm not a fan. Don't know about you.
I think it's really interesting. Whether it will catch on as a sort of passenger machine, I don't know, but just amazing.
And it's interesting because they can just, like, wherever the wind's coming from, they just move it into wind, and then it goes. So I used to run the Air Cadet Squadron in Bedford, and the squadron was just next to the 2 sheds at Cardington, of which one of the sheds houses that. So there were times that, that we'd see it kind of being moved in and out. It's quite impressive to look at when it's not, nose down.
My own, I guess I've got 2 connections with airships. One was I used to watch it was the Virgin Lightship at the time, sort of recover to various places around the M25, and my overriding impression was all of their disasters happened in really slow motion. So they were like, there's going to be a massive problem in about 2 hours. So they knew there was going to be a problem, and they were rushing around trying to mend it. And the other thing is that my Cub has had a sort of mid-air collision with one.
Really?
Yeah.
Surely everything gives way to an airship. I guess your Cub's pretty slow, though.
Well, it caught it up from behind. Would you believe?
What, the airship caught the Cub up?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that kind of gets rid of this, because John's here said Liverpool to Manchester at the same speed as Stevenson's rocket, about 25 miles an hour. John, we are going back in time, actually, with that.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting, because I think the whole picture of aviation has the potential to change. So
Agreed.
I think it's going to be interesting. But there we go. I saw some really interesting pictures of an F5 that one careful owner going cheap. This was absolutely incredible. So, it's a bit far away in those pictures, but very evidently an ejection. But I don't know if it's the snow plus the slope of the mountain. Remarkably undamaged looking aeroplane. Did you see any more about this, Scott?
They had a piece
I didn't see it.
to cover it.
Did they?
There was like a piece basher went up to recce out the crash site.
Everyone got away with it, so really, really rather wonderful. F5's cool, by the way. It's a cool airplane.
I did see something a little bit about it, and there are more photos in that sequence that you've got there. Mm-hmm. So it did look like it was in a spin, and it actually spun onto the mountain rather than into the mountain. I know that sounds a bit odd, but just the angle it was coming down at, it actually just caught the mountain at the right point and slid down the mountain rather than crashing into it. And the pilot just floated to the other side. It was very lucky, very, very lucky. But, great. I mean, what timing to catch a picture like that, though?
Yeah. F5 was developed for US-friendly nations. So do you know who the 2 biggest operators are from the Swiss?
So Swiss being the 2 biggest operators. Oh, I'm going to say the US, obviously, because they operate.
The US, they have the T-38, which it was developed from.
Training. Yeah.
F5s, yeah.
Malaysia, maybe? Somebody out in the Far East?
China and Iran.
Really? Okay.
There you go.
So friendly nations that we can use the airplane to spy on. Yeah.
Well, I guess in the 70s they were, things were different, weren't they? So, but there we go. Amazing. What else we got, Scotty?
Wow, I was just thinking that Lindsay is looking very glam this evening. Very glam indeed. You're looking lovely, Lindsay. This is me trying to get my diplomacy back after last week.
Yeah, keep going.
What's this about a makeover?
Well, not me, but thanks for all that. So Mandy, one of our previous guests, tweeted about the new Typhoon display team, and they've had a bit of a makeover for the new season.
Wow.
And, I mean, it looks pretty cool, right? So they've obviously missed the last 2 years due to COVID. And so they're back now. New colour scheme. The Chinook's got a similar thing. And I think, it's pretty striking for this year and next.
I think it looks cool. I mean, I know it's rather a shame that our flag's been sort of has a bit of far right nationalist kind of overtures about it, and I'm really glad we're taking it back. Thank you very much, because it's our blooming flag. Thank you, and it looks cool, and the Typhoon looks cool, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I have to say that does look pretty awesome, doesn't it? And I've seen lots of pictures of it this week on social media. The Chinook is cool. We've now got an A321 and an A330 all in the same livery, haven't we? With the flag, it looks very British. I like that. It's awesome. Cool.
So Mark and I were having Mark was talking to me about something this week. So we know that Mark loves aeros, right? You and I, Scott, are quite happy with
straight and level.
Straight and level.
Yeah.
However, this report has just come in. Mark, give us a bit of insight onto this.
So this is just unbelievable. So the BFU is the German accident report people. They investigate accidents. Thankfully, no one was killed, no one was hurt. It was all's well that ends well. This was a German corporate operator who flying from Biggin to Faro, and en route, I think it must have been an empty leg or something. En route, the skipper decided, I tell you what, I think I'll do a roll.
Well, he or she.
Yes, he or she
asked the co-pilot if that would be okay.
Yes. Allegedly, the co-pilot said, absolutely not. And he did it anyway. I'm going to assume it's a man, okay?
Definitely.
It's not. I'm going to say it's a bloke that's done this. It just seems absolutely bonkers. From my reading of the data, it didn't do a very good job of it either. To get to 2.5 G-ish on the pull on the other side seems very strange. Just why? And there is a little bit of history. I sent you the link. There is another German corporate operator that did precisely this in a citation, and they had a less good outcome.
Okay.
Involved hitting the ground.
A much less good outcome, I would say.
Yeah. They hit the ground so hard. The other lot hit the ground so hard that they set off the German missile defense system. They thought it was a missile strike, which is just unbelievable. I just can't get my head around why anyone would think that's a good idea. But even say it out loud.
No, and to be fair, the other one, at least this one was in daylight.
Oh yes.
And they dropped the nose, and they pulled at the bottom and managed to recover. The other one did it at night.
Yes.
So rolling an airplane, a bizjet at night, is only going to have one outcome in my view. And that was the outcome it had. Absolutely ridiculous.
Bonkers.
I mean, if only you had some sort of place to, I don't know, practice this.
Well, maybe they got the idea of flying a personal flight sim.
Which brings us nicely onto tonight's guest. So, our guest this evening has turned their lifelong interest in flying into a place where aviation dreams are started and nurtured. After an engineering degree in her native France, she crossed continents to seek out a job selling computer components. Working hard to fund flying lessons, she started developing her own simulator software. Today, that software is Infinite Flight and provides an entire aviation ecosystem and community where like-minded aeroplane geeks hang out and fly together online. Infinite Flight boasts exceptional detail and accuracy, which could only come from the minds of a team of genuine flyers. This is because when she's not coding software, she can often be found dropping into small airstrips in her X-Cub in the real world. She's crossed the USA twice by light aircraft, and now back in her native France is exploring the richness of that aviation scene. So we're going to be looking forward to hearing about simulation, grassroots flying, and blending technology and tradition. Laura Laban, welcome to the Layover Live. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
That's quite an intro.
Well, we hope you like it. It's right, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Very, very modest.
We are feeling a little bit out of kilter here because you have an amazing microphone, a great setup of flight sim behind you. Mark had to put his helmet out there to make it feel like our show is even aviation related at all. We need some more stuff. I've just decided we need some more stuff. And we'll get on to the fact that yours is much cooler than ours in terms of sound effects later. Something that we need to up our game on.
Okay, so Laura, I'm going to kick off tonight, and
Okay.
I think what's been really good about this show so far is that all of our guests come from a variety of backgrounds, and each of them has their own unique pathway into flying. So maybe if you could just give us an insight into yours.
Okay. So I'm not from an aviation family. My parents were not pilots, nor my grandparents on either side. And I got introduced to aviation by my brother, who one day came home with a copy of Microsoft Flight Simulator. I think it was 5.1.
Okay.
It had like a big, thick booklet explaining VOR navigation and all that type of stuff. And he never really used it. I was the one who was begging for computer time when he wasn't using it to play the flight sim. And so that kind of got me like into this flight simulation world. And a couple years later, I got my own computer, and so I installed, of course, Microsoft Flight Sim. I think it was 98 at the time, and I realized that you can build scenery for the simulator. And so I started, installing the tools and building some tools, building some airports from my area, so Lyon and around this area. And one day, a young guy from an airport just south of Lyon contacted me, and he told me, "Hey, thanks for making it my airport. It was Vienne-Reventin. It's just south of Lyon." And he said, "Well, do you want to go fly with me? I'd love to thank you for making this airport. If you can come fly with me." So I begged my parents to let me go, because I think I was like 18 or something, say 17 or 18, and they drove with me, and I took a flight. I think it was in a rally, a French plane, and that was just a moment. When I landed, I was like, I've got to do this. Flight sim is great, but this is crazy. I got to do it. And then shortly after, I partnered with a gentleman who's much older than me to commercialize scenery packages for Microsoft Flight Sim. And this is how I got, paid enough. Like, I got enough money to pay for the PPL. So as soon as I graduated from high school, I think the deal with my father was, you graduate from high school and then you can do your license, but not before. I graduated, had enough money to get started, and I got my first flight lesson in a 172 with a pilot who was not super enthusiastic about giving intro flights. So he was just like so blasé, like it was crazy. But my father, who flew with me that day, saw a guy in the flying club who looked a little more jovial. And that's how he's like, well, you got to talk to this guy instead of this grumpy old guy. Like, this one looks better. And so that's how I got my license. Yeah.
We've got a picture here, actually. Let's have a...
Sorry, what? Oh.
Let's have a look, yeah.
Yeah, that was my first solo. That's Georges Pernet. I've lost track of him. I think I was his last student. And then he moved on to flying for a nonprofit somewhere in Southeast Asia. All kinds of broken Cessna 185s and 210s and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Wow, we've got an episode. But which airport is that? Is that Laura?
That's Lyon-Bron, Lima Foxtrot, Lima Yankee.
I know Lyon-Bron very well.
Oh.
From my childhood, believe it or not, of
really?
all things. But
and Laura, do you think that when you started to fly real aircraft, do you think you had a really good foundation from all the simulator work that you'd done before?
Definitely. I think there's one remark that I remember from my instructor. Like the first flight that I did with the nice one, we went up north. He was kind of like trying to gauge where I was and what I could do. So we did slow flight turns and then so we were north of the airport, and he thought he had lost me with all the turns, and he's like, "Well, how do you get home now?" And I was like, "Oh, I know the NDB is 388." So I was like 388 and turned the ADF on. He's like, "How do you even know this stuff?" I'm like, "Dude, I have thousands of hours now." I mean, it's a good foundation to learn a lot of the technicalities of flying, but there's a lot of like, I think he fought with me to look outside, like all flight sim pilots,
Yeah, of course.
and of course the rudder, because like you don't have this feeling of like the non-coordinated flight when you're not in the plane. It's just like it's a visual indication on the screen, not a physical one. And he was a great instructor. I really had a good time with him. Yeah.
And so, go on, Mark. No, please go on.
I was going to ask, because France is a very aviation friendly, aviation sort of centric environment. Did you do any of the kind of youth French gatherings? There's a very large rally that goes on in France.
No, the guy who did my first flight, I did my first flight with, actually was, I think he competed a 1. He used to be like the youngest rated pilot in France at the time. Mm-hmm. So he's done some of it. The only thing that I've done was there's like a regional like union or something, like a group of something in the area that offered all pilots who got their license within the first year or something. You could get 20 minutes of aerobatics and like some kind of sortie in a mountain field. So mountain flying intro and landing on a sloped runway, which was super fun. Yeah. And he actually rolled the plane. I have a picture of him upside down in the rally. In retrospect, I don't think that was a good idea.
Well, I would like to say that some rallies are aerobatic and others aren't.
Yeah, I mean,
let's just hope it was an aerobatic one.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, Laura, we've talked about barriers to flying, cost being one of them, and I'm astounded by just listening to you that you paid for your PPL, or certainly the first portion of that, by doing scenery for flight sim, which I think is so amazing. But one opportunity, like yourself, for people to experience what flying's like is through simulation, whether that be on their tablet or on the computer. And looking at it now, having used Infinite Flight and others, the level of realism is just astounding now. If we look back to the days of Meigs Field and flying in Flight Sim 98, as you discussed, we're in a whole different world now. So for the last decade, you've designed and developed Infinite Flight. For some of our viewers who aren't aware of what that is, I'm going to come on to ask you what it is in a minute. But before we do that, we're just going to have a little bit of an insight. I'm so glad you put the Cub in there for Mark. It was amazing. So can you just tell us, Laura, for people who don't know, what is Infinite Flight? Explain this to us in a nutshell.
Okay, so one like our like kind of catchphrase is Infinite Flight, carry your passion. And we found that this really reflects what Infinite Flight is. It's a flight simulator that runs on iOS and Android devices that you can carry on your phone anywhere you go. And while like the people can sometimes perceive mobile games as being like kind of lesser to PC. We've reached levels today of computing power on the devices that's comparable to what we used to have on PCs a few years ago. So we can render like really amazing quality renderings and planes. So we have, I think it's about 50 aircrafts from the 172 to fighter jets and warbirds to like big 777s, 380s,
Airbus
747s.
A350.
Yeah, we have the 350
Yes.
with animated cockpits. We have live weather. Like we have a multiplayer system where people can fly together, and the area available when you have the subscription is the entire world and satellite imagery. So that's 15 meter per pixel, which is not super great for low level VFR flight, but it's still pretty decent. And it's great, 8,000 plus. It looks like real life pictures sometimes.
Wow.
So you have about all the airports in the world, and we just released in the latest update our 3D model, 3D airport system. So now we have people making airports in 3D, so terminals, gates, and all the kind of props that you can find around the airport. So like fuel trucks, baggage carts, and all that type of stuff. It's pretty fun. It makes like the whole experience a little more, kind of immersive. So, and one of the big aspects is the community, which like got a booster from the multiplayer system, where people can play together as controllers or pilots on different servers, and they can see each other. They can talk with ATC on the ground tower, ADAS approach, departure, and center frequencies. So we have predefined commands that you can send. So it's not text, it's not voice based, because we just think it's a moderation nightmare, especially from people from all over the world with different accents, different backgrounds in life. So we just have those predefined commands, which are super accessible with just like your thumb. You select, take off, runway this, departure to the north, or staying in a pattern. So that gives some context to everybody. Like the controllers have like sometimes like predefined answers depending on what they've already sent or what the pilots are requesting. Yeah, so it's like a full flight simulator in your pocket, basically.
Wow.
Wow.
And like if we go back to sort of, I guess, 10 or 15 years ago, like when you just started developing this, Laura, what was on the market at the time? And then how do you even start? I mean, I'm totally thick when it comes to computers. So how do you even start? What's the starting point?
So this project I started when I was studying in engineering school here in France. This was... I always wanted to write a flight sim, because like if you like aviation and if you like programming, like the mix, if you mix those two passions, a flight simulator comes out. So that was always like the thing that my kind of dream job would be to work on a flight simulator. And I had tried to work on or like use there's one called Flight Gear, which is open source that some people are using, which is pretty cool. And I tried to contribute, but like I was too incompetent to even build the project, so I just gave up. And I read some books about how to write a flight sim, but the moment when I understood that I could make one, like I really like the kind of like spark moment was when I was studying. We were working on a video game project, and I was tasked to work on the physics of the game. So you can like shoot things, and like you could topple over crates and stuff. And they had a sample in the toolkits we're using for physics, which had a car, and whenever the car was flipped on its back, you could use a little command to kind of put it back on its wheels. And I realized that if I used the same force at a position where a wing could be, and a rudder could be, and an elevator could be, give it enough speed and varied the force based on the velocity, that would be an airplane. And it worked. Turns out the physics is right. And if you have the right values, the right weight balance, it actually works like in real life.
And Laura, when you first started out, what were you hoping to, like, how far were you hoping to go? Were you hoping to think, right, we'll do one airport and we'll maybe try and, you know, get one aircraft around a circuit? Or when you had your initial sort of plan for the company, where did you see it going, you know, 5 years, 10 years down the line?
So there's like two stages. Like the first one was when I was just by myself in school. This was just a side project for me, just a way to experiment with 3D graphics, with physics, with math for 3D rendering. And that was just, there was no goal. Like I just didn't think I could make something that would be that somebody would pay for. And so it was just my side project. And when I moved to California, a friend of mine who was from the same school liked to work on things that a flight simulator could use, like physics, planet rendering, low-level rendering stuff, optimizations. And I figure like we could probably join forces and make this into a more of a commercial product if we just join our forces. And he agreed to work with me. So we just created the company, and we didn't really have like a plan. It was just like, we could probably make something that somebody may like enough to actually purchase, you know, the rights to use it. So that's how it got started. And the original plan was to make it on PC. And one thing that kind of sparked this was when Microsoft in 2009 stopped the project, the flight simulator. They laid off everybody. We figured like maybe there's some space now. There's still some people, some competition that are going to be thriving, but the main one with all the money is gone. So I figured let's go on PC. But then mobile revolution started. So we switched focus on mobile because it felt like the bar for mobile was a little lower. So this is how we got into mobile and stayed on mobile to this day.
Scott, I feel like you were taking a deep breath there.
I was going to say something, but go on. No, I was just going to say, Laura, we laughed about the airplanes earlier and talking about the mix, and you've touched on it. But, you know, you've got big, small, military, civilian, all sorts. Who decides what gets to go in? You know, you've got a great team behind you, but do you say, right, the next one's going to be the A350-1000 because that's cool?
Is that a request?
Yeah, well, it might be actually. Yeah.
We have at the beginning it was just we just had the 172, just one plane, and that was just Philippe and I decided, you know, let's make one that everybody knows, like the 172. And then when we shipped the app, we quickly set up a system where people could give us feedback and vote on the features they wanted. So that includes planes. So this is usually what we go by. So we added planes, but over like the course of 10 years now, there's some planes that have come out of fashion. And, you know, things just evolve in aviation, like some liveries come and goes. So we still go by what, you know, our community wants, but there's also some planes that we've added 10 years ago that now really need a refresh. So we've replaced some planes, like we used to have a Super Decathlon, which we replaced with the X Cub. There's some planes like the A320, which we've reworked 2 times now. So we go by what the community wants, but also what makes sense for us business-wise. Because when somebody starts the app today and they see a model that we shipped 7 years ago, that's not up to the standards that we have now with the cockpit, with some of the animations and the texture quality. We also try to like go back and redo some of those models. So sometimes it's not a popular decision because it's a plane that people may not, like the majority of the people may not enjoy. But it's still, for us, it's good to have a good offering that covers all types of plane, and we don't leave a section of our community behind.
Mm-hmm.
And Laura, when you say, you know, you rework like the 320, when you reworked it, what does that mean? Improve it, or what does a rework involve?
So there's multiple layers. So there's the physics, obviously the graphics layer. So if you look at the performance of devices in 2012, we had 128 megs of RAM. We had very low performance processors, so we couldn't go with 4K textures. We couldn't have models that had 200,000 polygons or more. So we were limited in terms of how much detail we could put on the plane.
Okay.
So the cockpits could not be detailed. We couldn't have instruments rendered in real time because we had to go render into a texture and then apply the texture to the model. And for some devices, this was just too much to bear. So obviously the graphic part is one of the most visible ones. So we'll have the artists go back into the model or restart it from scratch, and we'll tell them like, here's the budget now is 400,000 polygons. And the texture, you can have this many textures in 4K or in 2K. So they go back and do that. And on the physics side, I usually, every time we rework a plane, there's some things that we've added over time, like different, some of the lift curves have changed, or we have a better curve that we can use for a certain model. We have more precise data for the fuel consumption, the thrust, and also we've added also things like the ground effect, better handling for side wind, or like when you have crosswind. There's tons of little things that we rework even for the autopilot. Sometimes the autopilot needs a little tuning. And I've also now, what I try to do now is in the new planes, try to find someone who can give me a weight and balance for the aircraft, so I can have the empty weight, but the actual weight of each gear, so I can know at empty with nothing in it, this is what the moment of inertia is, or this is how I need to like move the default things to make sure that by default, at least the center of gravity is going to be exactly where it should be.
Wow.
That is unbelievably detailed.
Yeah, I just had no conception of the detail that went into it. So in terms of realism then, and I know this is a difficult question for you, but how would you, on a sort of a scale of 1 to 10, rate the realism of your newest product, i.e. the airplane you've brought out now versus the one that perhaps when you started out, your first one, that 172, what's the evolution of that?
It's quite different. I mean, I've also learned, like, it's like you're building a system, and sometimes I remember at the beginning, the 172, I think it felt like it was always too nose heavy. You couldn't really flare it much. It reminded me like the first Piper Cadet that I was flying in Bonn was very nose heavy. Had to trim it all the way back to make sure that I could flare it right. And I realized I learned basically our physics engine at the same time when we were building it, because I realized, okay, I can adjust the lift curves a little bit this way or that way, or maybe we support also wing twists. So maybe the wing twist is not right. So sometimes it's information, I have it, but sometimes it's not there, and sometimes I find out what it is, 5 years down the line. So when we have to rework this airplane, then I adjust it to make sure that it works better. Also having, also sometimes look at videos of a landing, for example, to see if the behavior is the same, if when the plane slams on the ground during heavy winds, if the motion that it makes sense physically. So first, like there was one time I remember in the early planes, the roll rate was always too quick, too reactive, like you had wing spades or like and I realized I need to add more weights to the wings, because the moment of inertia on the roll was not enough. Like it was like you were rotating something that weighs a ton, but only that's like a cylinder. But if you put weight on the far side of the wings, then it becomes much harder, not because you're faking it by making the controls react a little slower, but because it's harder for the forces to move the weight that's further away from the center of roll. So this is the kind of stuff that I've learned like over time building this system.
So this is like test pilot level of
Yeah.
understanding of physics and so on.
And
and
it's
I
fun because
suspect that,
especially for the first flight that you make, like I love making the first flight because especially when it's a new plane, because I'll just go and say like, okay, the graphics team sends me the model and I set where the wheels are supposed to be. I'm like, okay, here's the empty weight. Here's what it's supposed to kind of feel like. Here's what the wing profile is supposed to look like. And I'm like, okay, let's take it for a spin and see what happens. And that's super fun. So sometimes it doesn't work, but most of the time we're pretty close to the actual numbers. But the default is pretty close.
Yeah. And can I ask, is there a kind of an average user of Infinite Flight? What kind of background are they from, and what are they trying to achieve?
It's very eclectic. Even in the team, like our team, sometimes there was a few times where we had discussion. We're such a random group of folks that have different backgrounds, different stories, and it's the same for our users. There's we've had people who came from build design, who were like the range would be like from students, young kids to we had a big cargo boat captain who was flying. We've had airline pilots who were flying on their airline Wi-Fi when they were on a break. We've had a lobster fisherman, a lobster. Can we call it lobster fisherman? Well, someone who was fishing lobsters in the Bahamas, who's now a professional pilot, by the way, because he realized flying was great. We've had conductors. We've had people who play drums. It's just, retirees, lots of pilots. It's just, we had Buzz Aldrin actually play it. He tweeted about it a long time, like in 2014 or 13. So it's a wide range of people who play it.
And there's a man who really does understand the physics of it all.
Yeah.
Really does understand it. And I notice very quickly, you use the word play. Scott tweeted something, and I think somebody jumped down his throat and said, "It's not a game."
Yeah. It's a debate. I mean, I don't care. I would sometimes troll people like, it's not a game, but it's sort of considered as a game. It has to be in the game section in a store in any store to actually have some visibility. So it is sort of a game. Yeah.
No, Laura, it's not just pilots who are involved in this that are part of the simulation. You also have a whole arena where air traffic controllers can, I'm scared to say the word play now, get involved.
It's not a game.
how does that interaction work? How do the air traffickers get, how do they get involved with it? And then, can they interact with the pilots? How does that whole sort of, I don't know, arena work out?
So what's funny about this and a lot of the things that we build is that we don't really go with a business plan. We just it's the multiplayer and the ATC were kind of like intuitions that I told, like we were just Philippe and I at the beginning, and I just told him like, hey, I want to build a multiplayer version of it. So I just went off on a different branch of the code and like, let me just code this thing. Sometimes he doesn't like when I do this because he's more organized than me. So maybe sometimes my code is a little too quick, and he rants because he has to come and clean it up. But we didn't really have a plan for this. We just said like, hey, I think people want to fly together because we saw them playing. I was talking about this in this big thread that I did for our 10 years. Before we had multiplayer, people were flying on their own, but pretended to be online by having virtual conversations on a walkie-talkie app. And they had virtual airlines, and they said, we trust you made that flight. They couldn't verify anything. So we figured like there's something that people want to in flying together. So we built this system, and then it worked from the beginning. Like people wanted to fly together. Even if we had small regions at the beginning, we didn't have the whole world. It turned into a huge hit, and people, like the community, really took it to like as their own. Like they just like, it's our thing now. And so we kind of saw where people were taking it. And one thing that we learned from being in Silicon Valley at the time is that if you don't ship early enough and you're not ashamed of what you're shipping, you didn't ship early. Like it's too late to ship it. So we shipped just a version that had Unicom and people could just like send basic messages of like, kind of like a CTAF traffic kind of advisories, and saw what happened. We had some ideas, but usually there's a lot of the early ideas we figure like, okay, people are going to behave on the server. No, they're not. And then we realized that it's okay if they don't. Like there's some people who want to play seriously and some people who don't. So we gave space for people to play what we eventually called the casual server, where anything can happen. You want to buzz the tower in the 380 in formation with a 747, just knock yourself out. That's what the server's for. And there's a training server in the middle where people can learn to be ATC and pilots as well. So there's some automated kind of violation system in place to make sure you don't taxi at 100 knots on the ground off the runway. But there's not like it's for training. And there's the expert one where the controllers are vetted. They have the power to kick people out for a variety of reasons. So we make sure that this server is understood as the serious one, because there's nothing. I mean, it's more worse things like first world problem, but there's nothing worse than finishing a 12-hour flight and having some person camping on the runway when you're landing. Yes, you don't collide with them. You can, roll through them, but it ruins the experience because you've essentially crashed into somebody who's ruining your experience. So that's a core aspect of the sim. And the ATC part, like it at the beginning we're like, let's have controllers that we vet, but we didn't have a plan really. Like we need to maybe somehow get people to pass a test, but how, we don't know. Let's build the system and we'll see where it goes. And eventually we found Tyler, who is he was in the Air Force at the time, a controller, and he helped us build this entire infrastructure for ATC controllers. So there's schedules, there's ratings. It's an amazing team. I think they have about 400 to 500 controllers now that have schedules, and it's amazing to see how they work this out.
I just want to, I find it amazing. Just someone here, Michael Eldridge, says he's an in-flight flight user. Went from someone who liked aviation, didn't know much about it. Now he can tell you just about everything about ATC procedures and the real-world rules. And I know Lindsay might want to ask about that in a minute, but the pandemic, it's grounded us. We haven't been, well, not literally grounded, but we haven't been doing as much flying as we'd probably like. Yeah. What's the Infinite World airline been like during the pandemic? Have you seen an increase in people using it or not?
We've seen an increase at the beginning, and then it kind of slowed a little bit. I think the first few months where people were really like, okay, we're stuck at home. It was really active, but it's kind of always been active. One thing that was a bummer about the pandemic was in February 2020, I was working on showing the gnats, the tracks, and when I started, there was plenty of them. When there was just like one.
Yeah.
So now that you really see me sometimes tweeting about like, oh my God, we have 3 now going westbound. Like, oh my God, it's crazy. So there's, and it felt like at some point we were simulating, I'm not sure what, because we had those busy scenes at LAX, but it's like, what is even this now? Like, it doesn't happen anymore. There's no lines. There's no traffic. There's no A380 for Air France flying anymore. Like, what are we even simulating? That was kind of like weird to see.
And that's really interesting because, of course, you've mentioned, every parent's worst nightmare is that they're going to lose their children to some online gaming, faceless, invisible thing. When in fact, what you've described is a very human. It's people just interacting. They just happen to be through a tablet or through a PC. And that aspect of the pandemic and the simulation, what are we simulating? Are we simulating something that isn't real? Yeah. that is absolutely a fascinating aspect that I hadn't considered.
Yeah. But I think it's kept a lot of av geeks, quote unquote, alive by just being able. Like one thing that I've done often was take off in a plane and then go into the wing view and pretend, the food service was about to come, that I was flying to New York or LA or whatever. Like I miss this so much. Like going somewhere, like feeling like, okay, I'm leaving home, I'm going somewhere in a plane. This is something that we people are missing in our community. And about the like the parents' worst nightmare, I think we've yet to hear one parent tell us that this had a detrimental impact on their development or their life, because we don't. First of all, we don't simplify the concepts. So if your 172 doesn't take off on a hot day at Aspen, you can come and talk about it in the forum, and you're going to learn about density altitude, about what makes a plane fly, even if you're 9 years old. Or you can't really go on the forum at 9, but like you can learn about it on YouTube. Like people explain about this. And we've heard a lot from parents who said, some of their either the kids were on the spectrum on the autism spectrum, and it helped them find an outlet, a group of people who just didn't care about what they're like, how they are. They're just like, hey, you like planes? Come with us. We're flying. Like we're leaving from JFK in 10 minutes. Take your plane, gate this. We're leaving. Here's the flight plan. So there's a great community that's been built around the sim of people who just enjoy aviation and enjoy flying together. That's visible in virtual airlines, in all the events that we host ourselves, and that our users also host themselves for a variety of reasons. So super cool to see.
We're going to move on to X-Cubs and real airplanes and I don't know, reality simulating the simulator or something like that in a moment. But do you think there's a point where the sort of simulator technology and the kind of interfaces that you're developing might intersect at some point with remotely piloted airplanes or air systems that are developing now?
I don't know. Maybe. I think I see simulation more as like a replacement for actual flying, especially in countries where it's not possible. And I think VR is going to be a big part of this. I think the technology is not there yet. It's not accessible to a lot of people, especially on mobile. It's not there. But like one thing that really convinces me that this is what will change this is, one time I was at Philippe's house in San Francisco, and first time trying VR. I'd never tried it, and I was flying some kind of fighter jet over San Francisco in very detailed imagery. And then 5 minutes later, we were walking to a restaurant, and there was a part of my brain who was about to say, like, hey, I'm going to say I was flying over this 5 minutes ago. And then there's another part of my brain who was like, that doesn't make any sense. You can't really say this. Like, you were not there. Like, there's some kind of integrity detection mechanism in the brain that's like, are you going to say something stupid? Like, this sounds stupid. You were not 5 minutes. There's no way. And that experience for me, like, kind of solidified this concept. Like, if it becomes real enough that your brain is satisfied with the experience of flying even a plane you can't even afford, like a TBM 940. I want to fly this, but I can't afford one that much, let alone even renting one. It's too expensive. But if I could have the same experience without the risk and the expense, then why do I need to fly for real anymore? What's even, if the brain is satisfied, what's even the point? Risking your life, risking a midair, going to a place where your plane is going to break down for any reason, you being stuck over there, and the stress and the time it takes.
But that's a really interesting point, because I think that's a brilliant point to jump off to this, because of course you are an airplane owner and you own an airplane that is not the easiest airplane in the world to fly. So there must be a draw to it. But first, just tell us about did someone inspire you to sort of fly tail draggers, or did you just think, okay, the 172 is just a little bit dull. I'll move on to something else.
Yeah, so when I was in France, I was flying Pipers and Robins, the kind of typical airplanes that you fly in a flying club. And tail draggers for me were about ground loops and broken props. And when I moved, I met a friend called Bruno, who was working with me at NVIDIA. And he went flying with me in a Piper. And when we landed, he told me, like, you're a terrible pilot. You need. I can see that you're like the typical French pilot who doesn't fly enough. You need to come with me to Oakland. I'll introduce you to a friend of mine who's a Navy veteran who's flown many types of planes, and he has a tail dragger. And I was like, I don't know, it's an old plane. I'm scared of like ground looping it and looking like an idiot. And he's like, well, try it one time. And I tried it. It was a 1947 Aeroncast 7DC. And that plane smelled like you basically were breathing about 50% exhaust in the plane like the whole time. He didn't have a starter, no electrical. Like the master switch was basically plugging in the battery for the transponder because it wasn't in a class Charlie, so we had to have a transponder. And I just loved it. It just was flying. Like when you were landing, it's like you're landing. You're just. I was talking to a friend the other day. I was like, well, landing in tail dragger is it's like art. You can crap landing, like make a crap landing. It's like really bad, and you bounce 50 times. Or you can just have one smooth, wheel landing that you're really happy about. In a 172, at some point you're like, yeah, okay, it's great. I just landed a 172. It's not challenging, and the tail dragger is a little more. You're flying it all the way to the parking, basically. So. Yeah.
So Laura, if some of our viewers are listening and they've flown, they've flown the Cessnas, they've flown the Pipers, what advice would you give them if they wanted to get into tail draggers?
I would say just go to the flying club near you that has a tail dragger and give it a shot. I think it's not for everybody because if you're into SR-22s and flying long distance, this is not going to be the type of plane. Unless you fly a fast tail dragger, like an older plane that flies really fast. Usually they're going to be a little slower, more for like the local grass fields and enjoying an afternoon, just hopping with friends in formation. But I think the instructors that I've flown with usually tell me, it's like, we can see you're not flying just tricycle planes. And this is what I've heard from many other pilots who've had the instructor tell them that there's a different approach to the rudder, because in a tail dragger, you can't land without a rudder. If you do it, you're going to be in the grass, looking embarrassed. So you have to use the rudder. There's a little more, I think it's just to become a little more like one with the machine. I think it's better. There was one instance where I was flying with someone I didn't know because we're flying in a group, and there was too much for weight and balance. I had to go with somebody that I didn't know in a 172. And long story short, he never used the rudder on a 15 knot direct crosswind in a 172 G1000. And we ended up in the grass. And I was like, so now I don't fly with people I don't know, unless they're tail dragger pilots. And I told him when we came back, it's like, well, there's a Piper Cub in the hangar in your flying club. You need to fly this because you don't know what you're doing with the rudder. Like, he was an instrument-rated pilot. I went with confidence, and that was a mistake. Like, he'd never used a rudder on the ground, like on landing. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah. So I know that the X Cub wasn't your first aircraft that you owned, but it is my favorite Cub by far, and there's a reason for that. And Lindsay's going to show you the reason now. So I'm a huge advocate of the glass Cub. I know Mark isn't, because Mark likes the more traditional view. But what made you go for the X Cub? I mean, it's not a cheap option, and there's Mark's own slightly less salubrious model. But what made you go for the X Cub? Because it's not a cheap option for a Cub. It's it's an expensive airplane. Why that, Laura?
One thing that I've heard from people who bought airplane and were in the seminars, like what kind of plane you should get, and they say, find your mission and find a plane for your mission. My mission was tail dragger, having fun, and something that has tech in it. So if you combine those three, I think the X Cub is one. Is that package basically? I used to have a Citabria before that, a 7 GCAA, which is like a Cub but a smaller version, and I had a lot of fun in it. But I kind of felt at some point that so the cockpit was sort of glass with the iPad, but most of it was steam, and I felt like I had like overgrown that plane. I needed a little more challenge, and I saw the X Cub at Oshkosh in 2018, and I was like, oh my god, this is the plane that I want. It just looks so nice, and every time I fly it, I'm so lucky to have this plane. Super fun to fly.
And I mean, Scott says that I'm some crazy round dial obsessive. That's not quite true. I mean, you've got additional functionality, you've got additional capability in the aeroplane, and the X Cub is not slow. It's not a slow cruising aeroplane, is it? Particularly 130 or 114,
so. 114. True.
Yeah, which is so you can go places, and particularly if you're using it in the States or even around here. Airspace is complicated around here. Then all that kit is fantastic. Let's face it. And my Cub, I fly with an iPad on my knee with all that stuff on it, and I have to, because otherwise I'm going to get it wrong in some way, shape, or form. That doesn't stop me doing all the hold a heading for a time, that kind of stuff. But it is amazing. We've got some brilliant photos here, Laura, of I don't know. That looks like it's a small village that you're flying over somewhere.
Yeah, this was my local town, like a small park.
So, talk us through that, flying across. Well, that's Central Park.
Yeah, that's Central Park. After so that day, I decided I just did what I usually did in New York, was taking off and like seeing where the wind would take me. And I think I took off and I could see Manhattan from Danbury, where I was based, and I was like, I'm going to Manhattan. So one thing that I like to do was, like in this picture, going above the class Bravo, which is not that high in New York, and just cruising along, taking pictures and enjoying the view, and going down the other side of the Bravo into the either the Hudson corridor or the East River. And East River was one that I tried. I had read about it. I had learned, seen the instructions, but it's just I was always intimidated by the contact Newark Tower.
Yeah.
To first request the clearance, and because I figured I don't want to. I talked to San Francisco Tower so many times, but it was coordinated with NorCal before you crossed over into the Bravo. In this one, I was like, I'm just going to come on Newark Tower and just say hey, I want to go in the East River. It just felt like I was going to be screamed at by United Airlines pilot. Yeah, get out of here. We're busy.
And I'll be honest,
feeling a bit naughty.
Yeah. And Newark, if any Newark controllers out there, not necessarily the friendliest, kind of most forgiving environment ever. I mean, great fun, but it's hard rules.
Yeah. So what I did, when I was going down on the other side of the Bravo, I listened to the frequency, and I heard somebody saying we're just over Verrazano Bridge, requesting East River transition, and then crossing over Central Park at 1,500 and going north of the Hudson. I was like, hey, what if I say the same thing? Maybe they're going to let me through.
What could possibly happen?
I went down and I asked exactly the same thing, and they gave me a squawk code, maintain 1,500. And then they're like, okay, well, then do whatever. We don't care. So I went there, and then over the Governor's Island, they switched me over to LaGuardia Tower. And it's funny because those frequencies are not the same that the airliners talk to, contrary to SFO, where you're talking to 120.45, I think it was, and you hear everybody else. These frequencies were different. So I asked LaGuardia, I'm like, hey, over Governor's Island, 1,500 for the East River transition. And they're like, okay, maintain 1,500. Call me when you're done. I was like,
It was as simple as that.
So Laura, we've got a video actually which I'd like to play. So I'm just going to play a very short clip of this. Here we go.
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It feels like it's illegal the whole way through.
A good place to land a 320 just there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So Laura, I want to go on a slightly bigger scale now. So here in the UK, if somebody was to say, "Oh, I've done a cross country nav or a cross country flight," it would be somewhere like Southend to Gloucester, and it'd be like a couple of hours. But you've done a transcontinental trip across America twice.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? How did that opportunity arise?
Okay, so the first one was when I moved from California to New York in 2017. I was co-owner of the Citabria, and I told my friend, hey, I'm sure you want to buy another plane, so can I buy your share? So I bought his share, got the plane for myself, and I embarked on a flight with the same friend, Bruno, to New York. And it was an amazing experience. It was exhausting because weather and the Citabria does not have an autopilot. So it was an amazing learning experience of seeing how only the first leg is the one that works out, and the rest is just we'll see. We'll see what the plan is every single day, every minute, to see what the weather is going to look like. Because California is easy. The mess is Midwest and whatever's coming from Florida. So, all the storms and stuff. So, and the second one was,
So I was just going to say, did you literally make it up each day then in terms of your planning? Was it literally get up in the morning, look at a weather app and decide where we're going next? Was it as good as that?
And that was looking at sometimes 3 to 4 day forecast. Because sometimes, taking the northern route or the southern route makes a big difference. So the plan, the 2 times we did it, we're like, we need to stop in Oshkosh. I want to land in Oshkosh, even if it's not, the time of that year. I want to have Oshkosh in my logbook. And the 2 times we crossed the Sierras, and after the Sierras, it didn't work out. Like there was always something in the middle, and sometimes you can go one way and you can get completely boxed in for a week if you take the wrong route, because you would have to either go back to the west and come back from the south, or like wait for the fronts to pass by. And both times we had to go south. We couldn't really go straight on the north route. We had to go, and we ended up in Nashville 2 times. And it's funny because every single day there was no plan. Like we took off. We need to head east. That's the plan, heading east and try to go as far as we can. And it was tougher with the Citabria because with lack of autopilot meant that we were a little more tired at the end of the day, and we had to alternate roles. Like sometimes my friend was flying, sometimes I was flying. And then the X-Cub was just a breeze. It was so easy. Like when we landed in the evening, I could have gone for like another 4 or 5 hours of flying because I wasn't tired. Well, the only thing we did is looking at a screen, checking the weather options on ForeFlight and on the Garmin, talking to the controllers. That's all we did. The autopilot did the rest. So made a huge difference.
Yeah, and of course, you know, the brain is the bit of you that you want to be fully engaged for the whole day, you know. So
yeah,
that's another good argument for technology. Sorry, everyone. I know that people will get really annoyed. What an amazing trip! Can we do that?
I was about to say. I mean, we'll do it in formation. That sounds amazing. Interestingly, Laura, how long did it take you, coast to coast?
I think it took us about the same time in both planes because it was we were faster with the X-Cub, but we got stuck in Nashville. Well, we didn't really get we had to stop in Nashville earlier, and the second day we the last day we had to stop. We could have done Nashville to New York in one go, but we couldn't because of weather. So it took us, I think, 4 days. I think 4 or 5 days all in all. I think it was about 30 something hours.
So Laura, I just want to bring us up to speed now. So you're now back in France.
Yes.
And how did you get the Cub over? You shipped it?
I shipped it in the container. Yeah.
How was that?
It was stressful. I had looked at containers, ship, losing containers at sea. And it was a little scary. So the plan when I left just before the pandemic started, and I had plans to go back and get the plane like a month and a half after, but the pandemic hit and I couldn't really go. So I had a friend in New York who took care of the plane. And in June of last year, we made the decision to actually ship it because the pandemic had kind of died down. So they took the wing apart in Connecticut and put everything in the container. And then a month later, it was I saw the container arriving in Paris, and I was like, it's there. When we opened the container, and I saw okay, it looks in good condition. There's no dents, no issues. And the mechanic here was nice enough to let me stick around when he was putting it together. And I would recommend this to anyone, staying for an annual or even for when a plane's being put back together. Is just, I learned so many things, so many little details about how you put a plane together and how planes work in general, the control surfaces, all the kind of procedures to put a plane back in the air after taking the wings off. That was super fun.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, now you're back in Europe. How are you finding France? Flying in France again with fresh eyes.
It's very verbose. They're you can see that in America, it's a little more. It's more common to fly here. Every time we go somewhere, there's no FBOs. The procedures are different. There's for some of the airfields, it's well, here's the procedure to go in this airfield. You have to avoid Mr. Something's house and then make a left turn here because the pattern is not a square. In the US, you just came over, whatever, you just did your pattern. In France, you got to look at the chart to make sure you don't make a mistake and fly over someone who's too, loud at the airport meetings. So that's quite different. And also one thing that frustrated me and frustrates me every time we fly is that there's no coordination between, when you're flying VFR, there's no coordination between the centers and the all these centers approach, and they will basically tell you okay, squawk 7,000, have a nice day when you're leaving their airspace. It's in the US, they will tell you hey, contact this frequency, maintain your squawk. Here, they don't tell you that. So every time it's okay, so I've got to go back and tell them okay, I'm coming from there, going there, I'm this altitude, blah, blah, blah. And it's just so verbose and slow. We're flying formation on Friday, coming back from Deauville. And the controllers were oh my God, who cares? We told your friends we're formation. like, let's keep it moving. You got other things to do. There's all the traffic. Like, we're flying the plane. Why are you asking us all these questions? So there's no central system like they have in the US where you talk to a controller once, they have you in the system.
Yes.
So that's kind of frustrating. And in general, it's very verbose. Like, you have to, when you're talking to them, you have to say, this is my, like, this is like November something. You say hi, and it's like, okay, November something. Hi, say your request. In the US, it's like when you come into Denbury, it's like, 2 Mike Alpha, 5 miles south, inbound for landing with Victor. That's it. That's all you say. In France, it's like, and you have the French pilots being so verbose with like 4 people on board coming from this. À destination de vos installations, blah, blah, blah. It's so long. It's frustrating. And one thing that frustrates me here is like nobody has ADS-B. Very little planes have it. And I find it completely crazy. And I get some pushback from people. It's like, well, look outside. I'm looking outside. I'm looking outside. But when I'm busy with something, when the controller doesn't see something, or like, something is stressing me out, same for the other pilot. And high wing, low wing, like having ADS-B would be such a lifesaver for, and it is sort of like for when I'm talking to the controller, sometimes you can see we're flying formation. And for some reason, they wanted to know, I was flying behind, and they wanted to know my call sign. And they didn't have to ask the pilot who was the lead, because they saw me on the on their scope. They had all my information, and I kept my transponder on, even though I was in trail, because the other plane didn't have ADS-B, and I wanted to make sure that at least we had somebody broadcasting something in case somebody else had ADS-B. So I just wish they would do that in France.
I would say that it's one of the kind of big successes of the pandemic, really, in the UK, is that there's been an explosion of ADS-B, which is great. And as I say to very many people, the problem with mid-air collision is it is the one you don't see that you will hit. That is how the eyeball works. That's the physics of the eye. And so, I agree with you, Laura. I agree with you.
I have to say we all agree on this one, and also having drones with ADS-B, which is a new thing, is fantastic as well. So even the smallest drone now are getting ADS-B out, so that even the pilot can see it. So there's an advantage to the GA community getting that, because actually they'll be able to see things that you aren't going to see with your eye, because it's going to be so small. Laura, you've flown all over the States. You've flown back in Europe now. What's on the bucket list? What's top of the bucket list to do in Europe flying wise?
I just want to go back to the Alps, land on one of those sloped runways, because I think this plane is screaming for it, the X-Cub. So that's one of the things I want to do. I have friends in near Toulouse who've invited me over, and there's one guy that I know there that he lands on tons of surfaces, like grass runways in the Pyrenees, and it just looks so fun. I'd like to try that one day. So, and also like flying to see family around France would be fun.
Cool. Okay, so Laura, just before we go, we've got 3 questions that we ask of all of our guests. So Scott, you can kick off. You go first.
So Laura, looking back on your career thus far, what are you most proud of?
Having managed to build a product and actually ship it, because building a prototype is easy. Actually shipping it and making it work for 10 years is extremely hard. There's ups and downs, and sometimes the downs are really, really bad. When something's not working, and the worst part is when something's not working and it's only your brain can solve the problem. That's sometimes really frustrating and painful. But I'm happy that we made this work.
Mark?
What advice would you give your 10-year-old self?
That was my question.
Well, yeah, but my question's last, so I asked the next question. What advice would you give your 10-year-old self? And you can ask my question, darling.
Okay,
it's a domestic.
Lindsay, to your question about the advice. I would say iterate on your ideas. Even if it's a stupid idea, try it. Sometimes things can come out of it, and set aggressive schedules, sort of, because when you set aggressive schedules, and work on something every day, even if it's 20 minutes, what I do is I keep my development environment open all the time. My PC is basically my work. I don't do anything else on it, because whenever I have a few minutes, I'll work. And I've learned to multitask like this and not be like, it's just 5 minutes, it's not worth it. Yes, it's worth 5 minutes. Sometimes I have a break point that I've set in the morning, and then the kids are in bed. I have 5 minutes before we do something else. I'm like, okay, where was I? And I keep doing like, okay, maybe this is the problem. So doing every little bits at a time, because at the end of a year, all these little bits are probably 100 hours of work over a year, and it's better than zero.
Sure.
So.
Okay, and my question, Laura, is where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I don't know. We've changed and moved so many times. Usually every 2 years we go somewhere else.
Okay.
I think the pandemic will probably slow that down a little bit, and the kids growing up too. But probably still around here, or maybe back in the US. I don't know. Hopefully still with the X Cub, and having, for Infinite Flight, having weather and tons of all the stuff that we were missing, mostly weather now, and clouds and precipitations and that type of stuff.
Okay.
And hopefully joysticks on iOS devices.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Wow, that would be cool. That would be really cool.
We can do it today, but we need third parties, and it's not as seamless as it could be.
Well, Laura, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show this week. It has been such a pleasure and such a good insight into a whole area that I didn't know much about until now.
No.
It was a pleasure being here.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you very much
Laura.
for your time. Cheers,
Bye.
Laura. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
All
Laura.
right, bye.
Wow.
Wow.
That's cool.
I
Yeah, it
feel
was
very-
cool.
I feel very stupid as
Yeah.
well.
Me too. The physics of all that, it was just amazing. Little secret that I will share that we didn't mention was that Laura did actually do some 747-8 stuff for the Air Force One project. And if you look at the credits of the National Geographic show, which is on Sky, Infinite Flight and Laura get a credit at the end of that because she did the moving parts of the renderings for the new Air Force One.
Brilliant.
Cool. Scott, have we decided what we're doing next week yet?
We have.
Okay.
So next week, we've got 3 of the most amazing guests that we've ever had on. 3 guests. 3 guests. It's going to be a handful.
Okay.
The 3 guests are us, because everyone's been asking why we don't interview ourselves, because we've interviewed everyone else, but nobody knows really much about us. And I know we've talked about it a little, but what we're going to do is we're going to take people's questions next week. So if you want to send us some questions, you can do that via our Twitter page. So the DMs are open. So send us some questions via Twitter and we will answer those. But we'll also take some questions on the night. So we're going to interview each other, which I think will be quite cool. Quite excited about that.
Sounds good.
That is quite exciting.
All right,
It
Scotty,
is.
until then,
Until then,
we'll see you next week.
bye everyone.
Bye, everyone.